Well, hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Story Time. Today, we are going to continue reading The Apple and the Arrow. Last week, if you remember, we read the chapter entitled Waiting, and the Tell family was waiting to find out what had happened to their father, William Tell. Now, at the very end of the chapter, we discovered that he made it home. He was very weary and cold and hungry, but he made it home. But what we get to learn about this week is what happened while he was in Gessler's boat. What happened as he journeyed through the wilderness to make his way home. So we will begin with chapter 4, entitled Courage. Tell began. Gessler's soldiers bound me with iron chains. I fought with all my strength, and it took 5 of the rascals to hold me. They dragged me along. The people of Altdorf ran after them, throwing stones. A horse reared and struck a little maid. Gessler and his knights rode ahead of us and did not look back. How I hated that tyrant! If I had been free, I would have cut his heart to ribbons with an arrow. You would, father, you would too, echoed Walter proudly. What happened then, father? Asked Rudy, tugging at his father's beard. Be quiet, Rudy, and stop pulling at my beard, or I'll put you down, scolded Tell. Rudy, be good, said Hedwig soothingly. William Tell continued. When we reached the lake, the guards threw me into the bottom of a large boat tied at the water's edge. The sky was very dark, and it was raining across the lake. The wind blew, too, and there were white caps on the water. Those white-livered soldiers were fearful when they saw the high waves. They knew about the lake of the forest cantons and how dangerous it could be in the time of a storm. Were they all foreigners? The soldiers, asked Walter. Yes, most of them were, answered his father, but one, Peter by name. He was a good and kind man. When he saw that the chains were cutting my arms, he loosened them a bit. Peter once lived in Berglen as a lad. Do you remember him, Hedwig? Peter, the tanner's son? Oh, yes, Peter, mused Hedwig. Of course I remember him well. When I was young, I used to play with him in the village fountain. I did not know he had become a soldier for the governor. I would have thought better of Peter. He was such a sweet lad. Many men do many things, Hedwig, that they do not wish to do. Just to live, answered Tell sharply. Don't blame Peter. He was poor and had no trade. Men like Peter become common soldiers. You remember how many of our lads go abroad when they are grown and hire out to kings and dukes all over Europe. Of course, sighed Hedwig, putting her arms protectively about Walter, as if he too might someday become a soldier. But Peter was such a sweet lad, just like Walter and Rudy are now. Walter felt uneasy. He thought it might be nice to become a soldier someday when he grew up and wear a helmet and carry a long spear. Yet he knew his mother would never want him to. Tell continued, I saw that the soldiers feared the lake. It is a long way to Kusnacht by boat. They whined that the lake was dangerous in the storm. There were many hidden rocks. Ned said where boats had sunk. But stubborn Gessler commanded, Enter the boats, men, and let us be off. The Austrians took their places at the oars, and one handled the tiller. When we started out, a stroke of lightning flashed on the mountaintop above the Rutli. A sign, I thought. A sign. None of those stupid foreigners knew a thing about the lake of the forest cantons. It takes years to know the whims of the lake. Peter knew these whims, and he was pale. Not from sickness, but from fear. Once, father, I was fishing on the lake and a storm came up, and I saw whitecaps, just as you say. We brought our boat to shore at once, Walter exclaimed. Let father go on with the story, Walter, and do not interrupt, Hedwig scolded. The boat skipped about on the water like a cork, continued William Tell. No one could stand. Had I been free of the chains, I could have managed it, But those numbskulls thought they knew it all. How the wind blew! The waves were higher than this hut, my sons. Much, much higher. The rain made a gray blanket about us so we could not see. I lay at the bottom of the boat, soaked with water. I was shivering as with ague. The soldiers grew pale. They retched and belched. The good cider and deer flesh they had eaten at the inn at Altdorf that morning spilled from them into the water. Ugh. Peter knew we might sink at any moment. He stared at Gessler, and then I heard him plead, "My lord, there is a man in this boat, the prisoner, who knows the lake of the forest cantons as if he had drawn every rock and current on parchment. Please have pity and save us all. For the Virgin's sake, let William Tell take the tiller. He alone can guide us to safety. He has known this lake and its moods since he was a lad." Gessler looked startled. He stared down at me in the bottom of the boat, wet, shivering, bleeding. Peter pleaded again. Several of the Austrians, afraid for their lives, pleaded with him too. Gessler was sick himself. He belched and retched and was the color of mustard. Suddenly, after a fit of dizziness, he commanded, "Unbind the prisoner! Steer the boat, Tell, and steer it to safety, or your life is forfeit." "Ha ha!" laughed Grandfather. "What chance had the tyrant to do anything about your life if he himself lay at the bottom of the lake?" "Yes, that was the joke of it," laughed Tell. But no one saw a joke just then. They were all too sick and frightened. They unbound me quickly. I grabbed the tiller. The waves were now mountain high, and the wind blew us this way and that way. But in just a little while, I had the boat under control, and it was pitching in the direction I wished it to go. For I had a plan, and the plan did not include Gessler and his milksop crew. "What was the plan, Father?" inquired Walter breathlessly. "Now, if you will only wait, Walter, your father will tell you," said his grandfather. "Go on, William." As we drew into quieter waters near the shore, I steered the boat toward the flat rock below Axenstein, continued the mountaineer. I heard Gessler say happily, "We will soon land, men. Then we will rest in the forest until the storm is over. Toward evening, we will row to Kusnop." I smiled to myself. They would never rest in that forest. In a moment, the prow of the boat struck solid rock, and I jumped ashore. When I felt the rock under my feet, I kicked the boat with all my strength. It whirled around, and a crazy current caught it. In no time at all, it was far out in the lake. As I ran for the shelter of the forest, I heard the soldiers cursing me. They would have shot at me. But the boat was rocking too much, I yelled. "We'll meet again, Gessler." Then I hid behind a tree. I was sorry that I could not take Peter with me. "Yes, Peter was such a sweet lad," murmured Hedwig. "Father, didn't any of the soldiers shoot at you?" asked Rudy. "Rudy, Father just said they didn't," quieted his mother. "They were too sick. Don't ask any more silly questions." "What then, Father?" asked Walter. "Well, boys, you should have seen that boat. As I peered from behind a tree in the forest, what a rare sight I saw. Gessler was leaning over the side of the boat. He was very sick. The wind had blown his elegant hat from his head. It swirled around in the water, and then it sank. But I could not afford to gloat over his misery any longer. I had much to do, and quickly. I sat down on a log for a few moments, thinking. Perhaps the currents and the winds between them might sink Gessler and his soldiers. But I could not be sure. If they should escape drowning, I would be a hunted man forever. A price would be posted in every village for my capture. I could never live in my own home again. "Really, Father? Couldn't you sleep in your own bed as you always do?" asked Rudy. "No, little Rudy. I would have to sleep in the forest with a rock for a pillow. And if Gessler could not find me, he might pour his wrath upon you, my dear Hedwig, or on you, my father, or on my 2 sons. You remember how he blinded Arnold's old father when he could not catch Arnold?" said William Tell. "That is true," nodded Grandfather. And so, continued Tell, I made up my mind. I would waylay Gessler. If the boat should finally weather the storm, he and his knights would very likely land near the road that leads to the castle of Kusnacht. I would wait for him as he rode along the hollow way, as it is called, to his castle. It was damp and cold in the forest. I walked all afternoon and all that night without food or rest. Toward dawn I came upon the hut of Nicholas, your old friend, Father. Yes, Nicholas, the woodcutter. A good man, answered Grandfather, smiling. He was good to me, replied Tell. He gave me bread and meat. He warmed me at his fire. After a few hours, I started out again. I walked and walked. My legs were scratched in the dense thickets. See? And Tell pointed to his legs. Oh, Father, you are scratched up, said Rudy and Walter, touching their father's scarred legs gently. I didn't notice the scratches very much, continued Tell. I was so anxious to reach the hollow way. I saw a bear and deer and fox too, but did not stop, for I had much bigger game in mind than they. When I finally reached the sunken road, I was cold and very hungry, but did not dare to make a fire. I hid in the gaping hole of a huge pine tree away from the wind and waited and waited and waited. I waited long. Many times I thought I heard sounds of horsemen, but they were sounds of nature. The wind, rocks slipping, frogs croaking. I must have slept, for suddenly I awoke as I heard a new sound, a horse neighing. I listened. The sound came faintly again. It seemed nearer. Then I heard a dog bark and a horse's hoofs strike a rock far off. My father, you must have been scared then, chimed in little Rudy. No, son, I was too anxious to be scared. I got my bow ready and I waited. The mother doe was not more silent than I was. Soon I came across more sounds, a shout, a horse's neigh, pounding hoofs. I was sure now, and I was ready. I peered from behind a tree, and at last I saw something moving. Men on horseback. It might be another party of horsemen, I thought. Perhaps not Gessler at all. I must wait and be sure before I struck. It was hard enough for me to kill Gessler in cold blood, even after what he had done to me. But I must not kill the wrong man. How long did you wait, Father? Sighed Walter, his eyes big with suspense. Not long, I guess, son. Not long. Soon I saw horses and riders, and as they came nearer and nearer, they would suddenly disappear. For the road wound around big rocks and trees. But soon I could not doubt. The first horse approached me, and I saw the knight riding. It was indeed Gessler. But how the bluster had gone out of him. He rode wearily, a tired man. I had the arrow in place, and the thong tight. My fingers were on the trigger as I waited. I waited so long for this moment to come that I was a little nervous. I must get Gessler with the first arrow. I could not gamble on a second one. My fingers quivered as the horseman came nearer and nearer. He suspected nothing. Then the road curved. Between two great rocks rode Gessler toward me. Now he faced me. I whispered to my bow, "Bow, be strong. Arrow, be swift." "Oh, Father!" exclaimed the two boys. Yes, the arrow was swift, my sons. Gessler never knew what hit him. He slumped to the ground like a sack of meal as his horse reared. His terrified soldiers stopped and dismounted quickly. They rushed to the aid of their lord. It was too late. But I had no time to watch them. I ran back through the forest, and by nightfall I reached the hut of Kunz. "So the governor is really no more," sighed Hedwig. "Yes. He died as any man dies, poor or rich, great or lowly. Just like that log yonder," said Tell, looking into the smoldering fire. "Kunz was happy when I told him," continued Tell. He slapped his thighs and bellowed. His daughter had suffered at the hands of Gessler's soldiers, so you know how he felt. He brought forth a bottle of rare drink, and we drank to the freedom of Uri. And of Schweiz and Underwalden too, said Grandfather. Yes, to freedom for us all, replied Hedwig. All right. I hastened homeward after food, said Tell. I did not feel tired. Perhaps I was wrought up over what had happened. I walked and I walked. No man saw me but Kunz. I told no man of Gessler. I slipped through Altdorf and Bergland like a shadow, and not even a dog barked. Walter and Rudy sighed. The story was over. They looked up into their father's face, and their eyes were shining. But father, asked Walter, won't the soldiers look for you now? Will you have to hide in the forest in the daytime and sleep among the rocks at night, as Arnold did? No, son, I do not have to hide now, replied Tell, stroking Hedwig's hand, for he was trembling. Now that the governor is no more, those weak-kneed soldiers of his have no one to command them. They will hide from us like rats in a hayrick. They may even run away to Austria in the dark of night. They love their own skins too much to venture into our mountains to search for me. We mountain folk can shoot. Still, no one can be too sure, sighed Hedwig, still fearful. It is true, no man saw you shoot Gessler, but Kunz knows it. He may tell others, for he is happy. The story may be all over Uri soon. Well, what if it is? Answered Tell unproudly. Remember, Uri is big, and it takes time to get a story all over Uri, and the new year comes soon. It is as you say, Hedwig, added Grandfather. The soldiers may guess who killed the governor, but the new year comes soon, now, and we will revolt. We will revolt together. Walter glowed at the thought of the new year and the revolution. Already the herdsmen in the mountains are gathering wood, continued Grandfather. You should see the huge pile on Hochlau, boys. In a few days the people of Uri will drive the rascals out. But father, what will the king do when he learns that Gessler is no more? Asked Walter, worried about his father. Do? It will take a long time before the news reaches him, son. Austria is very far away. When Albrecht hears about Gessler's death, he may be too busy with other people and their revolts against him. No one likes Albrecht, and by that time, we will be free. Walter was silent as he thought if only Mother would let Rudy and me go to Hochulp on New Year's morn. Wouldn't it be wonderful to see the huge fires blaze on the mountaintop and to watch the great peaks light up, all the signal fires? He turned to his mother and said, Mother, Rudy and I are going out. She hardly heard him. She was so thoughtful. When the boys were outside, Walter whispered to Rudy, Rudy, let's go up to Hochulp and see if there really is a pile of logs, just as Grandfather said. They ran breathlessly up the mountain trail. And that is the story of what happened to Gessler. We have one chapter left, and we will read that at our next story time.